country estates in Britain were symbols of wealth, power and influence.
Hello, welcome to Durham.
Thank you so much.
For your visit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They have become time capsules of an era when the British Empire thrived.
Well, this is the Great Hall, and it contains the portraits of the Blathwaite family and the kings and queens that William Blathwaite worked for. And here we have the man himself, the man who built the house, William Blathwaite.
Dereham Park is one of 500 properties owned by the charity, the National Trust, an organisation set up in 1895 to preserve historic landscapes and buildings for the benefit of the nation. These fantasy homes are now often seen on TV shows like Bridgerton and Downton Abbey.
With that, I will say good night and leave you to discuss my mysterious past.
Once run by servants, these grand houses now have an army of volunteers that love history. So, Alison, how long have you worked here for?
I've been volunteering here for nearly 9 years now, so a reasonable amount of time.
Alison grew up learning about the mighty British Empire, ruled by powerful kings and queens, but now she is telling a new story.
I'd just like to show you one of the treasures of the house, which is this painting we have here, which is by an artist called Hoogstraten. It's a wonderful place to be because there is so much history, and the house was refurbished relatively recently, and the idea was to take it back to the 17th century, largely how William Blathwaite would recognise it.
William Blathwaite was a man who rose from obscurity to the dizzy heights of British establishment. And he did this through making lots of money.
He was Auditor General for the colonies, meaning the eastern seaboard of America and the Caribbean. He wanted to understand what was there, what lands were owned by who, and how they were being used. So these maps were commissioned, and the various governors in the area produced them for him, and they were all bound together in the Blathwaite Atlas.
While he was just an administrator, his primary aim was to keep money flowing from the colonies back to Britain. And this house, as it stands today, was created with that money.
Welcome to Thank you.
This is just one of 93 houses owned by the National Trust linked to slavery and colonisation.
It's a challenging story to tell. Some people don't want to talk about it at all. They've come to see the pictures or the furniture or the gardens even. Other people don't want to talk about it because it is a difficult subject and they feel that perhaps it's been talked about too much. And then we have others who are genuinely interested or concerned or challenging to say, why are you showing these things? So these stairs were made from walnut, which came in from Virginia, which was a gift to Mr. Blathwaite from people in the colonies.
Dereham Park takes you back in time to an era when colonies, plantations and slavery brought great wealth to Britain, but when a person of colour was considered property.
We're going now to Mr. Blathwaite's private apartments, and this is the room he would have used when he was in residence here to meet people and to work in, and it also showed off all of his access to items that only a wealthy man could actually achieve. Right, so we're just going to step into the room. Perhaps the most challenging items in the room are the stands, which were of enslaved Africans. And they're carved gilt wood. They depict two male Africans in chains, effectively. You can see that they're dressed quite elaborately, and they would have been quite prized items because of the quality. And these would have been used to put potpourri or sweetmeats in. they would have been literally part of the furniture that nobody would have thought anything about particularly, which shows how attitudes and things have changed.
Do you think such a shocking image should be on display?
I think there's a lot of debate around it. I personally think that we're showing the house as it was and Mr. Blathwaite's links to that history, and it's important to talk about that. They would have been here in the 17th century, so what we're showing is a 17th century house and a 17th century interior. I think as long as it's got context around it, this is just showing this is slavery in plain sight.
As far as the National Trust knows, Blathwaite didn't own slaves or a plantation. But Blathwaite, like many others in Britain, profited from an era where Britain invaded, plundered and took control of different parts of the world. At the height of the British Empire, it ruled a quarter of the Earth's surface, and the money made from slavery and colonisation funded the creation of many country estates. Like Harewood House, owned by the Lascelles family, who had shares in 21 slave ships and enslaved over 3,000 people on plantations. In the 1830s, Henry Lascelles was paid the equivalent of £2.5 million in today's money, compensation for lost property after the UK government abolished slavery. It was part of a reparations payout made to tens of thousands of slave owners, creating a debt that wasn't paid off by the British government until 2015. These grand houses and tourist destinations have become monuments to one of Britain's darkest chapters in history. Some heirs of slavery are looking to atone for the sins of their ancestors through reparations. Others say this uncomfortable version of the past is divisive.
I've got a problem with this constant looking back in history, feeling guilty for stuff that none of us in this era actually did, and then having to say sorry for everything.
A culture war has emerged on how Britain views its past.
British Empire was an amazing force for good, for civilization and for raising people's standards of living.
In 2024, only 64% of Britons said they were proud of their history, compared with 86% in 2013.
Britain and the British people have been demoralised, have been destabilised, have been undermined and attacked by this radical progressive elite that have captured our institutions and who absolutely loathe Britain and the West.
Nigel Farage and his new right-wing political party, Reform UK, is one of the loudest in the anti-woke movement, rallying pride in British history and throwing his support behind the National Trust's arch-rival, Restore Trust.
So it's all gone too woke, too PC, lost sight of its original purpose.
Well, certainly what Restore Trust wants to do is bring the National Trust back to its founding mission.
Cornelia Vanderpoel is one of the founders of Restore Trust.
We're a grassroots organisation. We have many people on our mailing list, both members, former members and non-members of the National Trust. We think the National Trust should stop fretting about issues around race and just do its job really well. And it's so important not to lose sight of the value and importance of these historic places for their own sake.
Restore Trust has become a mouthpiece for disgruntled National Trust members and volunteers. Their aim is to have people they support elected to National Trust's governing council. The media reported an old-fashioned coup.
We're not trying to hijack the Council of the National Trust. We're trying to introduce real expertise and diversity of thought. The National Trust does not have history as one of its charitable objects. So it doesn't have the established expertise in that area. And the problem arises when it tries to tell not just the story, but the moral of the story. In some cases, there's such a strong desire to put the emphasis on slavery or colonial links, for example, that some really important aspects of the property are underplayed or not given the spotlight in the way that they might be.
So why are great British institutions like the National Trust now telling these stories of Britain's dark past?
I think it's absolutely within our remit to look at the full history of our places, and for places like Durham, where it's so clear that there is a connection between the building you see today and the collections that you see, and the role of William Blathwaite in the administration of empire, means that it's absolutely important for us to be focusing on that history and understanding the continuing legacies. And I suppose my focus has always been on the importance of the history that we're presenting here, and the heritage, and how we do that in a way that is informed by the best quality research, that is sympathetic to listening to different communities and how they respond to that, but present the full history, and then it's up to people to make their own minds up and their own judgments on history.
But these judgments on the past are starting to change cities in Britain. Dr. Edson Burton, a historian and writer, has agreed to give me a tour through Bristol.
Britain's identity is changing, and with that change become different stories, new stories that come into light as new voices, the voices of people from the new Commonwealth have now become British voices, and are questioning, who are these icons of British history? What are the things that we celebrate? But I think it's critically important to how we see ourselves, how we bond and make sense and meaning of being British today.
Colonisation brought Britain incredible wealth and power, and much of it filtered through the port of Bristol.
So Bristol was at the centre of a regional ecology, creating goods for trade with the African coast, and then also bringing back goods made by the enslaved Africans in the Americas back into Bristol, where they would be refined and sold to the Bristol market.
For over 400 years, global slavery displaced over 15 million people. And Bristol's wealth was literally built on the back of slaves, with some of Britain's notorious slave traders based here. There is one well-known man, Edward Colston, who is being removed from the streets of Bristol, from the signs, from the building names, and even from his plinth.
Edward Colston was someone with investments in slavery. He was in slave ships in particular. He was also the secretary of the Royal Africa Company, and this was the company with trading rights to the African coast. It's involving trading in slaves, and something like 84,000 people were enslaved, including children, under his watch. As well as that, he was also a philanthropist, and some of that wealth which he had generated, he put into hospitals and schools, churches. And so Colston was everywhere. I mean, the street names after him, a major music venue named after him.
In response to the murder of George Floyd in the US in 2020, a group of local activists organised a Black Lives Matter protest.
It was torn down by Black Lives Matter protesters on Sunday and thrown into the river where his ships once docked.
Dr. Edson Burton witnessed that moment.
I thought the statue wasn't going to come down. I thought it was much more substantial than actually it was, and that's fascinating in itself, isn't it? We give these edifices so much power. I turned around and I looked into the face of a young black woman, and her eyes were streaming with tears of relief, and that touched me in a profound way, that I also realized that actually something cataclysmically had shifted, that we were in a new awareness and a new possibility, because now Colston had gone. It wasn't Colston, but it's the conversation around identity, our past, and where we want to go. That's what was, in a sense, opened up by the removal of the statue.
The statue was fished out of the river and is now displayed in the Bristol Museum. a new addition to the city's history of protest. As a proud Indigenous woman and reporter, I've seen colonial statues defaced and toppled, and my people battle with museums and King Charles to have human remains and stolen artefacts repatriated from overseas collections.
Give us what you stole from us! Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people! You destroyed our land! Give us a treaty! We want a treaty in this country! You are! Get inside of it! It's not your land! It's not your land!
I've come to Kelvin Grove Museum in Glasgow to see how a place once built to celebrate and exhibit the power of empire is changing its ways.
So this is the World Cultures Gallery. It's called Cultural Connections. It was originally...
When Patricia first came to this museum, she discovered a treasure trove of stolen artefacts.
I was appalled, I was upset, and I felt that I should at least contact the rightful owners. I should find out who they were and try and perhaps encourage them to have a say and have some agency in the museum collections.
One Indigenous American artefact kick-started the case for repatriations.
Well, there's a very good example of repatriated items right here. This is the ghost dance shirt, the Lakota ghost dance shirt, that was taken from the body of a warrior who had fallen as a result of the massacre of Wounded Knee, and it was taken from the battlefield. It was one of the first artefacts ever to go back from a British museum. So this is actually not the shirt, it was a modern shirt, and rather than a complete replica, because it was made from obviously different materials.
And that sort of sparked something within you to want to take up this kind of work.
Yeah, it was partly this, but also the first time I came across ancestral remains, human remains, which were very visceral. It was very, very immediate emotional connection. And I thought, and I definitely knew they should go back. And that was my first, and continues to be my first interest, to make sure the ancestors are comfortable.
I think it's, quite refreshing to hear this approach, especially, for my own people, to have ancestral remains returned and for, cultural artefacts to be returned. It really means a lot to ensure that they come back to country where they belong. In 2007, Kelvin Grove Museum repatriated human remains to Mer Island in the Torres Strait. It's a bureaucratic process that can take years, but the difference here is Pat and the museum is actively seeking out the rightful resting place for remains and artefacts. One of the next collections waiting to go home is the Benin bronzes.
Benin was a kingdom in what is now Nigeria, and we acquired all of these objects as a result of the 1897, what the British called the punitive expedition. They went in and basically destroyed Benin City and dismantled the entire structure. So this is actually the head of a king or an Oba, and these were displayed on altars within Benin Palace. So this would have been displayed with an ivory tusk inserted in the top, and the tusk represented the link between the heavens and the ancestor, who then became a spirit.
The bronzes here are just a few of the thousands of items taken from the Kingdom of Benin, a brutal and bloody British occupation that destroyed a kingdom. These artefacts embody the legacy of colonisation. Some argue they are now part of a shared global heritage and no longer belong to just one nation. Nevertheless, the Nigerian government has sought the bronzes returned since they gained independence in the 60s. While other museums are repatriating bronzes, Glasgow is one of the few places to not ask the country of origin to prove their ability to preserve these artefacts.
Glasgow Life considers the right or of the people or person to represent the culture or the community or those ancestors. I feel that we're effectively harbouring stolen property, or property that was taken illicitly, certainly without consent. If someone robs your house and those robbed items, your property is apprehended and found by the authorities, you do not expect the thief to set conditions on return. Really, we have no right to decide what happens to something when it goes back, because many objects are not for museums. I think Indigenous Australian secret and sacred objects were not made to go into museums. They were made for another purpose, and they should be returned to the people who know what that purpose is.
Across the world, old ideas of British imperial power are being replaced with tales of human atrocities and looting.
I understand from listening to people across the Commonwealth how the most painful aspects of our past continue to resonate.
And in Britain, the country is at a crossroads on how it should atone for the sins of the past. Here at Kelvin Grove in Glasgow, they are changing the way they look back at the legacy of colonisation and slavery, a move that some see as virtue signalling and woke. But when it comes to the repatriation of items like the Benin bronzes, local Glaswegian Gideafor says the way forward is simple. Give them back.
I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but brought up here in Glasgow, and as a result of that I kind of describe myself as an Afro-Wegian, fiercely proud of my dual identity. These bronzes were made to tell the stories, the histories, following our wonderful West African traditions of not necessarily writing things down. It's a really uncomfortable feeling, seeing them in a glass box in Glasgow. That's not where they were meant to be. These are living historical objects.
Gideafor is bringing together artists and poets to tell the stories of the Benin bronzes' dark past.
Stolen across swollen waters. To you, thousands of us were pieces of wood, tusk, and brass to tickle the fancies of heartless merchants and enablers of violence. But you were wrong.
The British Empire created wealth, power, art, diversity, and beautiful country estates. Things to be proud of. And with this diversity of new voices comes truth-telling about Britain's past. Whilst some believe that approaching history through truth-telling can lead to healing, others believe museums and stately homes should simply display the past and not attempt to atone for it.
It's not about people in this country at all, none of this is. And that's the biggest change for me that needs to happen. We're dealing with other people who have as much of a right to access to their own cultures as, and more of a right, in fact, than we do.